Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. They were just finishing dinner when the doorbell rang. 12-year-old Emma jumped up to answer it before her father or brother could move, but quickly returned to the dining room with a bewildered look on her face. "It's a policeman, Daddy. He wants to talk to you," she informed him. David felt a chill of fear but did his best to hide it from his children. When he reached the door, he saw the caller was actually an FBI agent. "Are you David Mitchell?" the agent asked. "Yes," David confirmed. "Are you Sarah Mitchell's husband?" When David nodded, the agent glanced at the two children and said, "May I speak with you privately, Mr. Mitchell?" David felt his throat tighten. "Tyler, Emma, please go to your rooms. I need to speak with the officer alone." Both children started to protest, but when their father's voice turned sharp with "now," they hurried to comply. They weren't used to hearing such a tone from him. Once the children had left the room, the officer turned back to their father. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been asked to deliver some difficult news. Your wife's yacht is missing and presumed lost. It disappeared from radar tonight in Lake Michigan during the storm. The Coast Guard is currently searching the area." The facts were straightforward enough. Sarah worked as regional sales director for MedTech Solutions, a major pharmaceutical corporation, traveling frequently to meet with hospital networks across the Great Lakes region. She had gone out on a company yacht with their financial director, Marcus Reynolds, for what was described as a client entertainment event. The 40-foot yacht should have been able to handle the October weather on Lake Michigan. David hadn't thought much of it when Sarah had called to inform him of the business trip. Now he was devastated. His worst nightmare had come true. His wife was lost in the cold waters of Lake Michigan. The agent provided a few additional details that weren't reassuring to David and promised the Coast Guard would call in the morning with any updates. No sooner had the door closed behind the officer than Tyler and Emma came running up to him, concern written on their faces, asking questions their father couldn't answer. David knew they'd been listening. He would have been doing the same thing in their shoes. The three of them huddled together, each trying to find encouraging words for the others. Emma began to cry, and though he tried to be brave, Tyler's eyes reddened as well. David was doing his best to hold himself together for his children's sake, but inside he was falling apart. Dishes and homework were forgotten. They spent the rest of the evening close to each other. It was past the children's usual bedtime, but there was still no phone call. Finally, exhausted by the late hour and their fears, all three moved into the master bedroom, and the children fell asleep beside their father for the first time since they were small and afraid of thunderstorms. The next morning, they were trying to eat breakfast when a Coast Guard representative called. The faint hope generated by the call was quickly crushed when the officer informed David that the search team had found the yacht, empty and adrift. There was no sign of the passengers. David called the principal at the children's school and explained why Tyler and Emma would be absent. He then went to check on them but found them sitting in front of the television, watching a CNN report about the missing yacht. David wasn't sure whether to let them continue watching or turn off the TV, but before he could decide, the phone rang again. From that moment on, as soon as David hung up from one call, another came in. Not surprisingly, Sarah's parents and his own were among the first to call. All were deeply worried but were also trying to project false optimism that she would miraculously be found. David promised to call immediately with any news. Then followed calls from Sarah's friends and colleagues. Everyone wanted to say or do something to help, but none had any real idea how. The conversations were short and awkward. The most difficult calls came from media representatives. David should have expected them, but he was caught off guard when the first reporter called. He spoke to the Chicago Tribune reporter longer than he'd intended. When other media outlets started calling, David began screening his calls, answering only those from people he cared about. During all this, a steady stream of neighbors and friends began appearing at their door with condolences and food. At first, Their generosity was appreciated. David didn't have the energy to cook, but soon he and his children had more food than they could eat in a week. It was an old Midwest tradition to express concern and condolences through food, but while David appreciated the gesture, every casserole and roast was a bitter reminder that his wife, with whom he'd lived for 16 years, was almost certainly dead. The next few days were horrible. The Mitchells were virtual prisoners in their own home, held together by their desire to avoid other people and their hope for news from the Coast Guard. David called the Chicago Coast Guard office daily for updates, but the reports were always negative. 5 days after the FBI agent had appeared on their doorstep, the news they'd been dreading arrived. A Coast Guard officer called to inform David that debris from Sarah's yacht had been recovered. There was no sign of survivors. "I'm sorry, sir," the officer concluded, "but we're suspending search and rescue operations." David wanted nothing more than to hide and mourn alone, but there was no such opportunity. Instead, he faced an endless list of responsibilities, all of them excruciating. The worst part was breaking the news to Tyler and Emma and trying to comfort them. When they'd finally calmed down, he had to call family and close friends. Then he contacted their church to arrange a memorial service, followed by the newspaper to write an obituary. More calls followed to inform people of the service details. By the time he finished, David felt physically and emotionally drained. Somehow the family made it through the service and began the slow, painful process of trying to return to normal life. The children went back to school the following week, and resuming familiar routines seemed to help a little. David was less fortunate. He now had a whole new set of responsibilities. ATA friends urging, David contacted an attorney to understand his legal obligations. He was shocked to learn he would need to apply for a death certificate. "But her yacht was found in the lake," he protested. "How can there be any doubt?" "I understand," the lawyer sympathized, "but without a body and a medical examiner's statement, the court must make an official determination." "Do I really have to wait 7 years?" David asked in frustration. "No," his attorney assured him. "In cases like this, where someone has gone missing at sea or in this case a large lake, there are usually no significant delays. After incidents like 9/11, death certificates were issued within days, even though some bodies were never recovered. You may have to answer some questions, but these cases are usually resolved quickly. I can draft a petition for you." The attorney continued, "I can also help you update all the other documents." When David looked confused, the lawyer explained, "Well, things like joint bank accounts, mortgages, insurance, car titles, wills, anything with both names. You'll also need to contact your wife's company to find out what benefits you're entitled to and collect her personal belongings." David shook his head wearily. In his grief, he couldn't stop thinking about how difficult it would be to untangle the life he and Sarah had built together. Now he had one more task he was dreading, calling the widow of Marcus Reynolds, the financial director who had been on the yacht with Sarah. David had met Reynolds only a couple of times at Sarah's company events, but he'd immediately disliked the executive. In David's opinion, Reynolds was one of those self-important types who thought they were smarter than everyone else. In the brief time David had spent with him, Reynolds had managed to drop enough names and brag about his achievements to leave a bad taste in David's mouth. But it wasn't his widow's fault, David reminded himself, and he felt it was his duty to reach out. David called ahead, and Lisa Reynolds was waiting for him when he arrived. As they exchanged condolences, David realized she was probably the only person who truly understood how he felt. As they settled in her living room, she asked gently, "How are you holding up, David?" "It's tough, Lisa. Really tough. I just can't accept that she's really gone. So many things remind me of her." He shook his head helplessly. "You know what the hardest part is? When I'm out on the street or in a crowd, I keep thinking I spot her. The other day I must have scared some poor woman half to death when I caught up with her because I thought it was Sarah." He looked at the floor, recalling the moment and his emotions when he realized his mistake. Lisa looked at him sympathetically. She knew no words would help. Finally, He looked up at her. And you, Lisa? How are you managing? It's not easy, David, but I'm handling it, she told him honestly. The truth is, I'm probably coping better than you are. Marcus and I didn't have children, so I don't have two young ones to comfort the way you do. She paused, then added quietly, besides, and I wouldn't tell this to anyone else, Marcus and I weren't getting along well before this happened. I discovered a couple of affairs in the past, and I suspected he was involved in another one. If this hadn't happened, we'd probably have been heading for divorce long ago. I'm sorry to hear that, Lisa, David told her sympathetically. I can only imagine the conflicting emotions you must be feeling. Yes, she agreed. One moment I'm relieved I don't have to deal with his cheating anymore, and the next I feel guilty because I'm not sadder. But no matter what, part of me still misses him. Are you going to be okay financially? David asked, trying to change the subject. I'm not sure, she admitted. The good news is that the company had life insurance on Marcus, and since he died during a business trip, there's a double indemnity clause. I'll receive twice the face value. The bad news is I'm going to need every penny because I've learned that Marcus made a series of bad investments in the futures market and seriously depleted our assets. What Lisa had said about her late husband didn't surprise David. He couldn't believe a selfish man like Marcus Reynolds wouldn't be a faithful husband. Besides, the idea that Reynolds fancied himself a market trader was entirely consistent with David's impression of the man. David's attention was drawn to Lisa's mention of company-paid life insurance. He remembered his lawyer's advice and made a mental note to contact Sarah's benefits department immediately. If Reynolds had been insured, Sarah must have life insurance too, and until he found a job, the money might come in handy. After chatting a few more minutes, David rose from the couch. Lisa, please forgive me, but I need to cut my visit short. Tyler and Emma will be getting out of school soon, and I need to pick them up. But please stay in touch, and if there's anything I can do to help, even if you just need a sympathetic ear, don't hesitate to call. When David pulled up to their house after collecting Tyler and Emma, he was surprised to see a car parked out front. David led the children into the house through the garage, and a minute later, the doorbell rang. Outside stood a woman in her 30s and a man in his 50s, both dressed in business attire. I'm Special Agent James Sullivan, the man introduced himself, and this is Special Agent Rebecca Torres. We're with the FBI. We'd like to ask you a few questions in connection with your wife's disappearance. Realizing the two were law enforcement officers, Emma wrapped her arms around her father's waist and buried her face in his side. David felt her tears dampening his shirt and held her tightly. What's this about? He demanded angrily. Before the first agent could speak, Agent Torres intervened. I'm very sorry we've upset your daughter, Mr. Mitchell. We're just trying to complete a routine investigation in connection with your application for Mrs. Mitchell's death certificate. If you'd prefer, we can come back at a more convenient time. David ignored her and turned to his daughter. It's okay, sweetheart. Nothing bad is happening. The female agent dropped to one knee, reached into her purse, pulled out a tissue, and held it out to the girl. Here, honey, she said gently. Emma hesitated, then timidly accepted the tissue, wiped her eyes, and blew her nose. When David saw his daughter had calmed down, he put his arm around her and spoke softly. These people need to talk to me about your mom for a little while. Emma, why don't you go start your homework? I'll be right here in the living room if you need me. With those words, he gave the 12-year-old a gentle nudge toward her room, then turned to face the agents. If this doesn't take too long, let's get it over with. The three of them walked into the living room and settled around the coffee table. We need some basic information about your wife, Mr. Mitchell, the male agent began. How long were you married? We got married in 2008, right after I graduated from Northwestern, David replied, remembering the beautiful brunette he'd won over so many years earlier. And she worked for MedTech Solutions until her disappearance? That's right, David confirmed. She was regional sales director for the Great Lakes region. If her territory is the Great Lakes, why would she be on a yacht with the financial director? At MedTech Solutions, David explained, the Great Lakes region includes major hospital networks throughout the Midwest. Sarah often had to take potential clients out on corporate hospitality events. Marcus Reynolds managed the budgets for these activities, and he sometimes joined these client entertainment outings. Marcus, the woman noted, were you and Mr. Reynolds close? David felt his voice tighten. Not particularly. I'd only met him a few times at Sarah's company events. Agent Torres reached out and patted his shoulder sympathetically. It's all right, Mr. Mitchell. I know this is difficult. The senior agent decided to change direction. Was it normal for your wife to participate in these yacht outings? Yes, David replied. Sarah's job required a lot of client entertainment. She said it was essential for maintaining relationships with the major hospital networks throughout the region. Both agents took notes, then Agent Torres looked up at him. What about you, Mr. Mitchell? What do you do for work? David managed a slight smile. I'm a stay-at-home dad. Noticing their expressions, he continued, I was an automotive engineer until 4 years ago when my company downsized and I was laid off. The only opportunities for new employment would have required moving out of state. But Sarah's career was taking off. She'd gotten several major promotions and was making an excellent salary plus substantial bonuses. It didn't make sense for her to quit, so we agreed I'd manage the household and take care of the kids while she worked. And how did this change affect your relationship with Mrs. Mitchell? Agent Sullivan asked. What's that got to do with anything? David asked irritably. Please bear with us, Mr. Mitchell. The younger woman intervened. We need to understand if any factors might have played a role in your wife's disappearance. This is routine procedure. Calming down slightly, David looked at both of them. Sure, it was a big adjustment for me, but I'm an engineer. I'm trained to analyze all factors in a situation. It was easy to see that my career change was the right decision for our family. It allowed Sarah to focus on her career and ensured Tyler and Emma always had a parent nearby. Neither agent said anything, and it seemed to David that the question hung in the air. That's not to say it was easy, he continued. She was always on calls with clients or in meetings at the corporation, so I didn't see her as much as I would have liked. Sometimes I felt like her work came first. He suddenly realized what he was saying and added hastily, but that's pretty common in corporate life. And things were going well. He caught himself. Things had been going well. 2 more questions, Mr. Mitchell, Agent Sullivan said. Did you notice any changes in your wife's behavior in the time leading up to her disappearance? Not really, David replied after a moment's thought. I knew she'd been under a lot of pressure the past year or so, and her travel schedule had been busier than ever. But Sarah said she was in line for a major promotion to the national level. When she got it, she promised the new position would reduce her travel and come with a significant pay increase. One final question, Agent Sullivan said, making notes in his pad. Are you aware of any changes your wife may have made to your finances in recent months? No, David answered confidently. I keep track of all our finances and haven't noticed anything unusual. The young woman glanced at her partner. I think we've taken enough of your time, Mr. Mitchell. We should be able to wrap this up fairly quickly, and we'll let you know as soon as we're finished. In the meantime, if you think of anything you believe we should know, please call me at this number. She handed him her business card, and the 2 agents headed for the door. David went back to his children's bedrooms to check on their homework. When he peeked into their rooms, both looked busy. They're strong kids, he thought. They've been through hell and they're holding up well. The next day, David drove to MedTech Solutions headquarters to visit the benefits department. The department head met with him, and after expressing her condolences, handed him a box of Sarah's personal belongings from her office. David had to swallow hard when he saw the framed family portrait she'd kept on her desk. The director then referred him to a specialist who would advise him about Sarah's benefits. The first thing she did was review Sarah's 401k account. David had read her annual statements regularly, so he didn't expect any surprises. However, when he saw the total, it was much higher than he'd anticipated. Apparently, Sarah had increased her contributions to her retirement fund over the past year, even beyond what the company matched. She was really trying to provide for her family, the specialist commented admiringly. The specialist further advised David to withdraw the funds as soon as possible and roll them into his own IRA to make management easier. Another surprise was the insurance benefit statement he received as Sarah's beneficiary. He learned that Sarah had chosen the maximum insurance coverage available. With the accidental death clause factored in, David realized with amazement that he would receive the equivalent of Sarah's income for almost 4 years. The insurance company will pay that amount in annual installments, the woman explained. Otherwise, the taxes would be devastating. Payment of all benefits was, of course, contingent on the company receiving a copy of Sarah's death certificate. But after the visit from 2 FBI agents, David was confident that would happen soon. David left the office building with considerable relief. He thought he would have to start looking for another job immediately. Now he realized he had significant breathing room to get his life together. "Thank you, Sarah," he whispered gratefully. A few days later, David was preparing dinner for his family when the doorbell rang. When he answered it, he found Special Agent Torres on the doorstep. After he invited her in, she explained her visit. "Mr. Mitchell, David, I wanted to personally inform you that our investigation is complete and your wife's death certificate has been issued. You should receive a copy from the court in the next few days." David breathed a sigh of relief. He'd believed there would be no problems, but it was good to know this important matter had been resolved at a tea that moment. A panicked cry came from the back of the house, and David was startled to hear Emma's voice. "Daddy! Help me! Help me!" He turned and rushed toward Emma's room. Rebecca Torres followed close behind, her hand instinctively moving toward the service weapon in her shoulder holster. When David burst into Emma's room, he saw his daughter staring at a large red stain on her jeans. "I'm bleeding, Daddy," she wailed. David was alarmed. "What happened, Emma? Did you hurt yourself?" As he moved toward his daughter, someone's hand grabbed his elbow and pulled him back firmly. "Let me handle this," Rebecca said decisively, pushing him toward the door. "But he protested. "I'll take care of this, David. Just go to the living room and wait." Something commanding in her voice made him pause, and when the determined young woman blocked his path, he reluctantly retreated to the hallway. Rebecca calmly closed the door. After 15 anxious minutes, the door opened and Rebecca appeared. Before David could ask a question, she grabbed his arm. "Emma's fine. You need to go to the store right now and buy sanitary pads. Get the lightest absorbency." "But Emma, Tyler," he began to protest. "I'll take care of Emma and explain things to Tyler. You need to get to the store and back here as quickly as possible." As David drove to the nearest pharmacy, it hit him, and he began to berate himself. "She started menstruating, you idiot. You should have realized immediately." On the way back, he kept cursing himself for never having talked to his daughter about growing up. "Oh, Sarah, I need you more than ever," he thought. When he returned home, Rebecca met him at the front door and took the package from him. Looking at it, she smiled. "You did good, Dad." Then she disappeared back into Emma's room. After another 30 minutes, Rebecca reappeared with Emma, who walked somewhat shyly toward David. David dropped to his knees and hugged his daughter as she approached. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I should have talked to you about this long ago. I just didn't think." "It's okay, Daddy," the girl said softly. "I just didn't understand what was happening, and I got scared. Rebecca explained everything to me. Now I know what to do." As she spoke, she took Rebecca's hand, and David realized his daughter had found a new ally. He stood up and turned to Rebecca. "Thank you so much. I'm glad you were here. I guess I panicked for a moment." He looked at his daughter. I'm afraid I'm not very experienced with girls. Rebecca smiled, but before she could respond, Tyler appeared from around the corner. Just because my sister got her first period, does that mean we're not having dinner tonight? I'm starving. Tyler, Emma shrieked, but David caught her before she could launch herself at her 15-year-old brother. Tyler, if you talk to your sister like that again, I guarantee you'll go to bed hungry, David warned his son. But before his threat sounded too harsh, he continued, Now go wash your hands and set the table. Then he turned to Rebecca again. The least we can do is offer you dinner for everything you've done. It's not exactly fine dining, but there's food. The young woman looked embarrassed. Thank you, but I couldn't. Her protests were cut short when Emma tugged on her arm. Please, Rebecca, stay and eat with us. Looking at her new friend, Rebecca smiled. Okay, Emma, just for you. Looking at David, she smiled again. Thank you. I'd love to have dinner with your family. The four of them sat down at the table, and Rebecca became the subject of many questions from the two children about her experiences in law enforcement. David ate and listened, both amused by his children's curiosity and delighted by how easily Rebecca handled their questions. He suddenly realized that, for the first time in weeks, both of them seemed to be emerging from their grief. When dessert was finished, David sent Tyler and Emma off to do chores, then offered Rebecca coffee. As they sat at the table, David had a chance to ask his own questions. You seem comfortable with Tyler and Emma. Do you work with young people often? She smiled. I actually come from a big family, 2 brothers and 3 sisters. I was the oldest, so I guess I was like a second mother to the others. She paused to sip her coffee. That's why I knew what to do with Emma this afternoon. I walked each of my sisters through the challenges of puberty. She looked at David and smiled again. For that matter, my dad was as helpless as you were today. David grinned sheepishly. Well, all I can say is I'm grateful you ended up here. Even when I finally realized what was happening, I still wouldn't have known how to calm Emma down so quickly. She smiled gratefully, but then her expression became more serious. How are they coping with losing their mother? David sighed. About as well as could be expected, I suppose. Emma's been very clingy. I think she's really missing female guidance. As for Tyler, it's hard to say. He's become moody and a bit withdrawn, but I'm not sure if that's because of Sarah's death or just the fact that he's becoming a teenager. Rebecca looked at him sympathetically. From what I've seen, I think you're doing an excellent job with them. It's just going to take time. For them and for you. With those words, she stood up. I really enjoyed the meal, David, but I've been intruding on your family long enough. I should go now. But if you don't mind, I'd like to say goodbye to Emma and Tyler. When David nodded, she walked into the hallway. David heard her say goodbye to Tyler. Then she spent a few minutes in Emma's room. When she returned, Emma was walking with her, her arm around Rebecca's waist. She really has found a new friend, David thought in surprise. A few days later, a package arrived in the mail for Emma. When his excited daughter opened it, she found a pink stuffed elephant along with a note from Rebecca. David was touched by this thoughtfulness but was puzzled by the choice. Emma's too old for stuffed animals, he thought. But he was surprised to see the toy take a prominent place on Emma's bed. I guess she still has some little girl in her, he admitted to himself. The next day, he called Rebecca's office to thank her. I never would have thought of it, he admitted. But somehow it was exactly what Emma needed. Rebecca was pleased that his daughter liked her gift and made David promise to keep in touch and let her know how Emma and Tyler were doing. A few weeks later, David was paying bills when Tyler's teacher called him one morning. I'd like to meet with you to discuss your son, the teacher told David. He's having some behavioral problems at school. David agreed to meet with her the next day but decided not to say anything to Tyler that night. He wanted to understand what was happening before confronting his son. The meeting was scheduled for the following day after school, while the children were in physical education. Mrs. Santos, The ninth grade teacher told the concerned father that Tyler's behavior in class had deteriorated over the past few months. At first, I didn't want to say anything because I knew he'd been through a lot, the teacher explained. But it seems to be getting worse. He's becoming increasingly distracted, not completing his homework, and the other teachers tell me he's not paying attention in their classes either. He's always been a good student, but his grades this semester will drop significantly if he doesn't make some changes. David was concerned. How much do you think being a teenager factors into this, Mrs. Santos? It's certainly a difficult age for children, especially boys, she told him. But we're used to that. I think his mother's death is affecting him more than he's been able to tell you. Perhaps you should consider counseling. David thanked the woman and returned to his car to wait anxiously for the kids to finish gym class. He was upset to hear about Tyler's problems and was determined to have a serious talk with the boy. When David brought Tyler and Emma home, he sent Emma to her room to start homework, then led Tyler into the master bedroom. The boy's face darkened. He realized he was in trouble. David recounted his meeting with Tyler's teacher and gave some examples she'd provided. "What's going on, Tyler? Why are you acting this way?" "I don't know," the boy replied sullenly. "Come on, you're smarter than that," his father dismissed. "Don't you care about your grades?" "Not really," Tyler muttered. David was frustrated by his son's unresponsiveness and, in anger, tried to shame him into reacting. "What would your mother think if she knew you were failing? Who cares?" Tyler shouted back angrily. "She was a—" He stopped himself, but David could see the fury in his son's eyes that in shock and anger. David grabbed his son's shoulders. "Don't you ever talk about your mother like that. How can you say such a thing?" Frightened by his father's intensity and the pain of his grip, the boy whispered, I saw her with that man." As soon as the words left his lips, he collapsed on the bed and began to sob. In amazement, David sat down on the bed next to his son, put his arms around him, and held him like a small child. "It's all right," he repeated, trying to soothe the boy's obvious distress. When Tyler's crying subsided, David lifted his son's chin. "It's okay, Tyler. I'm not angry with you. Just tell me what you saw." His son looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "It was last fall. You let me ride my bike to school one day, but I forgot my math homework, so I snuck home at lunchtime to get it. While I was looking for it in my room, I heard Mom come in. I didn't want her to catch me skipping class, so I hid. That's when I heard a man's voice." "What man?" David asked, perhaps too quickly. "I don't know," Tyler said. "Some guy I'd never seen before." "It's okay," David reassured him. "Just tell me what happened next." "They came in here and then it got quiet. I thought I could sneak out, but then I heard Mom make sounds, and I got scared, and I looked into the room and they were on the bed together." The words tumbled out of his mouth faster and faster, like he was desperate to get them out. When he finished, he burst into tears again. "Why did she do that, Dad? How could Mom do that to us?" Listening to his son's story, David felt himself going numb, but he didn't have time to deal with his own emotions. His son needed him. "I understand, Tyler. It's okay. I'm sorry you had to see that, but I'm glad you told me." He gently took his son by the shoulders and turned him to face him. Sometimes people we love make mistakes or do things we don't understand. It doesn't mean we stop loving them, just that we don't like what they did. I don't know why your mother did what she did, son, but I know she loved you and Emma very much. I want you to remember only the good things about her. He hugged his son and continued talking to him for a while longer. When he felt the boy had calmed down enough, he gently asked him to start on his homework. Before Tyler left, David asked him not to say anything to Emma. The boy promised, and David was confident he would keep the disturbing news from his sister. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but as soon as the children went to bed, David began to process his emotions. His first reaction was denial. His son must have been mistaken or misinterpreted what he'd seen. But he couldn't maintain that logic for long. Tyler was too upset about what had happened for it to be a misunderstanding. After accepting the truth, David's thoughts turned bitter. How could Sarah have betrayed him? He'd thought they had a solid marriage. How could she have been involved with someone else? And who was the man? How long had the affair lasted? It's hard enough to lose your wife in a yacht accident, he thought despairingly. It's even worse to discover you'd lost her long before that. Sleep didn't come that night, and the next day David was in a dark mood. It was Tuesday, the day he usually went to the gym. After the kids left for school, he decided to stick to his routine. Maybe the exercise would help distract him. The workout helped briefly, but when he sat on the rowing machine, his thoughts returned to Sarah's infidelity. How could Sarah do that? And in our own bed? Somehow the location made the betrayal even more painful. And how could she have been sure I wouldn't be home? But the answer came immediately. It must have been one of those days when I went to the gym. I'm such a creature of habit that she knew the house would be empty. But that answer immediately spawned more questions. If she'd planned her meetings to fit his schedule, it wasn't spontaneous. How often had she met with him? She couldn't have met him every week. Her travel schedule would have interfered. Each question seemed to generate another, and each one only added to his misery. He tried his best to act normal around Tyler and Emma, but over the next few days he continued to suffer. He went to the pharmacy to buy antacids. He'd never had stomach problems before. His misery was compounded by the fact that he had no one to discuss his discovery with. He certainly didn't want to tell his parents or Sarah's. He knew the news would devastate them. Likewise, he didn't want to talk to friends, risking becoming the subject of neighborhood gossip. And I certainly don't want to risk any of their classmates teasing Tyler or Emma, he thought. He felt trapped. He was working at his desk one evening when he noticed Rebecca Torres's business card. She told me to call if I had any additional information, he remembered. But in truth, he was desperately looking for any excuse to share his news with someone and get another perspective. He called the cell phone number she'd written on the card. When he introduced himself, Rebecca seemed pleased to hear from him, but her tone changed to concerned when he said he needed to talk to her. Are Emma and Tyler all right? She asked anxiously. They are, but I'm not, he replied. Would you mind having lunch with me tomorrow? It's not something I want to discuss over the phone. She quickly agreed and suggested a place near the FBI office where she worked. It's a quiet place where we can talk, she assured him. As he hung up the phone, David felt slightly relieved at the prospect of talking to someone. Rebecca was waiting in the restaurant when David appeared in the doorway. She smiled in greeting, but the smile quickly faded when she saw the distressed expression on his face. After they sat down and ordered, she couldn't stand it anymore. For heaven's sake, David, what's wrong? You asked me to let you know if I had any additional information about my wife, he said. I don't know if it relates to your investigation, but I just found out that Sarah was having an affair. As he said this, he was ashamed as tears filled his eyes and streamed down his cheeks. Rebecca reached across the table and took his hands. Oh, David, this is terrible. Tell me what happened. The whole story poured out. The meeting with Tyler's teacher, the confrontation with his son, and Tyler's painful revelation. It was interrupted only by the arrival of their food. Rebecca listened in silence, letting him tell it at his own pace. Only when he reached the end did she speak. Poor Tyler, she said. No wonder he's acting out at school. It must have been eating at him ever since it happened. And then her death. No wonder he's so troubled. She had released David's hands when the waitress brought their order, but now leaned across the table to reach for them again. It's hard for me to imagine what this has done to you, David, she said quietly, and David saw genuine sympathy in her eyes. Were there any signs that something was wrong? Looking back now, did you notice any clues? She asked. No, he replied. I can't say I saw anything. You know what they say, the husband's always the last to know. He lowered his gaze to his untouched plate for a moment, then looked up at her again. Ever since she got her big promotion, our intimate life went downhill dramatically. But with the pressures of her new position and travel schedule, I thought it was understandable. I didn't like it, but I felt I had to accept it for the sake of our family. She kept telling me things would get better when she moved up to the national level, but he paused. That didn't seem destined to happen. Then he frowned. It's killing me that I don't have any answers. I don't know what kind of man she was involved with. I don't know when their affair started or how long it lasted. I don't know if she cared about this guy or if she was planning to leave me. Worst of all, I don't know why she did this to me and the kids. Rebecca squeezed his hands. David, please listen to me. The truth is, you're unlikely to ever get answers to those questions. You're gonna have to let go of all this. With her gone, none of it matters anymore. All you can do is focus on taking care of your family and yourself. I know you're right, he said, but it hurts so much to be betrayed like that. I thought she stopped loving me. No, Rebecca said firmly. You're wrong. No matter what happened, it's obvious that Sarah still cared deeply about you and the kids. Look at what you learned at MedTech Solutions. She bought maximum life insurance to make sure you were all protected. She maxed out her contributions to the 401k to put money aside for your future. I don't know what else was happening in her life, but those actions look like love to me. Thank you, Rebecca. I'll try to remember that. When they got up to leave, he looked at their table. Neither of them had touched their food. I guess I'm not great company for lunch, he remarked. Don't worry about it, she replied lightly. Skipping a meal or two is probably good for me. David looked at her slender figure. She looks pretty good to me, he thought. It's been a long time, he said to himself regretfully as they were walking to the door. She took his hand. Please stay in touch, David, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I'd really like to help. Then she reached up and kissed his cheek. As she turned away, David thought he saw a blush appear on her face. Back at home, David was surprised to find his mood had lightened. I guess I really needed to talk it out, he said to himself. The following Saturday, David was in the yard cleaning up branches that had fallen during a storm. When he came into the house, he saw Emma talking on the phone. He turned to Tyler, who was standing nearby. Did someone call? David asked. No, Tyler replied dismissively. She's just talking to her new BFF, Rebecca. David was surprised. Does she call Rebecca often? And what's a BFF? Oh, Dad, Tyler replied in exasperation. You're totally clueless. BFF is best friend forever. And yeah, they talk all the time now. At that moment, Emma looked up and saw her father. Daddy, can we take Rebecca to dinner tonight? Let me talk to her, he said, holding out his hand to his daughter. When she handed him the phone, he said, Hi, Rebecca. I think you heard the invitation. Would you like to have dinner with us tonight? Tyler and I will be here too. He heard her melodious laugh, followed by quick agreement. Great, he said. Why don't you come over around 6? After they agreed, David hung up the phone and turned to his daughter. Well, she's coming. I hope you're happy. Oh yes, Daddy, she squealed. Well, in that case, you and Tyler need to clean up this place so she doesn't think we're living like animals. Oh, Daddy, do I have to? Tyler complained, but before David could answer, the boy turned and began picking up the clothes he'd left around the room. He's still a teenager, David thought, but he seems to be getting better. Turning toward the kitchen, David began pondering what dish he should make. Definitely something better than spaghetti and meatballs, he thought, remembering the first time Rebecca had eaten with them. He finally settled on a salmon dish, which he considered one of his specialties. He was confident he could prepare it well, and the kids liked it, which was always a plus. For that, he knew he'd have to make a trip to the grocery store. After explaining his errand to Tyler and Emma, he told them to stay in the house until he returned. He found a nice piece of salmon in the seafood department, then decided to pick up dessert at the bakery. I should get a nice bottle of wine, he thought, and directed his cart to the appropriate aisle. Once he found what he wanted, he stopped in the floral section and bought a bouquet for the table. On the way home, he thought about what he was doing. I'm really going all out for this dinner, he realized with surprise. Eventually, he decided it was because he owed Rebecca a proper meal after ruining their lunch. Rebecca rang the doorbell at 6 sharp, and before David could reach the door, Emma was already ushering her in. To David's amazement, even Tyler made an effort to appear and engage in polite conversation. David, for his part, felt slightly awkward and tongue-tied, but if Rebecca noticed, she didn't show it. Instead, she chatted cheerfully with Emma and readily agreed to go see what the girl wanted to show her in her room. By the time they returned, dinner was almost ready. The dinner was a great success. Rebecca was appropriately impressed by his culinary skills. "Oh, a man who can cook, my mother warned me about guys like you," she teased. She was clearly comfortable with the children, both of whom chatted away in response to her questions. When dessert was finished, she insisted on helping with cleanup, and with her assistance, the dishes were soon cleared and loaded into the dishwasher. At this point, Tyler excused himself to continue a video game he'd paused, and Emma wanted to watch a favorite show she'd recorded. So the two adults took their wine glasses and went into the living room. "David, that was wonderful," Rebecca complimented him. "I don't know when I've had such a good time. Thank you so much for inviting me. I don't think Emma would ever speak to me again if I hadn't." David laughed, and Rebecca joined him. "She's a wonderful girl, and you're lucky to have her," she replied. "And her dad's doing a pretty good job too." David felt his face redden, but then Rebecca's expression became more serious. "David, besides having a great time with all of you, I'm glad you invited me because I have some information I want to share with you." David caught the change in her tone and looked at her curiously. "This is very confidential, David, but I think I know you well enough to trust you, and it concerns you, at least indirectly." Now she definitely had his attention. "As you know," Rebecca began, "the FBI was supposed to conduct a routine investigation before issuing your wife's death certificate. As you also know, we found nothing that would prevent us from issuing the certificate, which was properly done." She took a deep breath and continued. "Naturally, we did the same thing with Marcus Reynolds, but we discovered some irregularities. First, it turned out he was in financial trouble after a series of bad investment decisions." David nodded. What Rebecca had said matched what Lisa Reynolds had told him. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, "Over the past few weeks, MedTech Solutions' internal audit department has informed us that they've discovered what appears to be significant irregularities in their Great Lakes regional financial operations, which were overseen by Marcus Reynolds. Even more concerning, they believe they've uncovered a fraudulent procurement scheme that may have resulted in the embezzlement of millions of dollars from the company, and Marcus Reynolds appears to have authorized much of it." "Poor Lisa," David commented. "She didn't deserve that." But then he began to consider what Rebecca had told him, and new possibilities opened before him. Could Marcus Reynolds have orchestrated this disaster? Could it have been a way of covering his tracks? When Rebecca said nothing, David's imagination accelerated. What if Sarah found out about Reynolds' scheme? What if he killed her to silence her and staged the yacht accident to hide the evidence? Maybe he's still alive. Maybe he's hiding out in some tropical paradise, laughing at all of us. "Take it easy, David," Rebecca urged. "You're getting carried away. The most likely scenario remains that the yacht went down unexpectedly, as we initially assumed. If Reynolds was really involved in the embezzlement scheme, the accident interrupted his plans. We're exploring all possibilities, but we can't jump to conclusions, and neither should you." But David had trouble shutting off his imagination. "You don't think Sarah could have been involved, do you?" he asked sharply. Rebecca sighed. "It's not impossible," she agreed, "but we don't think it's likely. For one thing, if she was involved, it would mean she planned to abandon her family. It's unusual for a mother to abandon her children, especially children Tyler and Emma's ages. She gestured toward the children's rooms. Reynolds, on the other hand, had no children, and his wife reported their marriage was falling apart at the time of his disappearance. Moreover, unlike Reynolds, Sarah's finances were in perfect order, and before her disappearance, she'd done nothing to suggest she was involved in any scheme, if indeed there was one. In fact, her actions were exactly the opposite of someone planning to disappear. But it's all just speculation, Rebecca continued. The only fact we have is that Sarah's yacht did indeed sink in the lake. She had hoped to reassure David, but when she looked at him, she realized he was still troubled by her revelations. David, you have to promise me you won't say anything about any of this. It's very confidential, and if word gets out, it could jeopardize our investigation. It could also lead to my dismissal. This made David tense. He realized Rebecca had taken a risk by confiding in him, and he was obligated to remain silent. I understand, Rebecca, and I promise I won't compromise your investigation. But I have to ask, why did you tell me all this? She looked at him seriously. It's unlikely, David, but there's always the possibility you'll hear something or learn something that will help us understand all this better. If you do, promise me you'll contact me right away. No Lone Rangers, please. He returned her gaze. I promise, Rebecca. Then he smiled. Besides, if I have to deal with you again, it won't be such a hardship. The smile she gave him seemed to light up the entire room. Shortly afterward, Rebecca had to leave. Before doing so, she said goodbye to Tyler and Emma. David noted that Tyler had interrupted his game to say goodnight to her, which was high praise from him. Emma walked her to the door, extracting Rebecca's promise to call her again. But this time, after Emma hugged her, Rebecca didn't hesitate to lean up and kiss David on the cheek as she walked to her car. Emma looked at her dad and said, "She likes you, Dad." David smiled at his daughter and pulled her close. "Well, I like her too." When everyone had gone to bed and the house was quiet, David lay thinking about what Rebecca had told him and all the different scenarios he'd imagined at Osara. He thought, what did you get yourself into? Finally, he fell into a restless sleep. A week later, David was sitting at his computer reading about some of his favorite sports teams when he noticed a Facebook icon. On a whim, he clicked on it. David wasn't much of a Facebook user. In fact, he rarely visited the site at all. The only reason he had an account was to keep track of his children. Tyler and Emma loved the social networking site and used it to stay in touch with their friends. David didn't mind initially, but after reading some concerning articles about online dangers, he'd created his own account and insisted that Tyler and Emma add him as a friend. He also asked them to give him their passwords. That way, he reasoned, I'll be able to see all the messages and photos they post, as well as anything their friends send them. More importantly, he thought Tyler and Emma would know he could monitor them, and he hoped that would encourage them to be careful. When he logged onto his page, most of what he saw didn't interest him, but he did notice a friend request from someone he'd never heard of, Tom Thomason. The name seemed unfamiliar, and there was no photo, just a silhouette. When David clicked on the name, the stranger's page informed him that personal information was only available to friends. "Hey Tyler," he called out. "Do we know anyone named Tom Thomason?" His son walked into the room and saw his father browsing Facebook. "Oh, that guy. Just ignore him, Dad. He's been trying to get me to add him as a friend for weeks now. I just delete his requests." At that moment, Emma peeked into the room. "Yeah, he tried to friend me too. He's just some creeper on Facebook." It was enough to get David's attention. Some unknown person was trying to make contact not only with him but also with his children. David knew there were all kinds of scammers out there, as well as much more dangerous predators. He was alarmed but didn't want to frighten the children, so he simply said, "You two did exactly the right thing. Never respond online to anyone you don't know personally." As he looked for a way to protect his family, an unexpected idea occurred to him. Maybe Rebecca can help us find out who this creep Thomason really is. He called her home number, and she must have seen his name on caller ID because she answered warmly, "Hi, David." "Hi, Rebecca. I'm glad I caught you at home. Is there any chance you could come over? Something strange has come up, and I'd like to check it out with you. If you're free, that is. It's nothing serious, is it? Tyler and Emma are okay, aren't they?" As he reassured her, David couldn't help but notice that she seemed as concerned about his children as he was. It gave him a warm feeling. She told him she was working in the yard but would be able to drive over in 45 minutes. To David's surprise, she arrived almost exactly on time. With Sarah, he remembered, he was lucky if she was no more than an hour late while perfecting her appearance. But Rebecca arrived promptly, clearly freshly showered, dressed in a casual but attractive outfit with neatly styled hair and fresh makeup. It was obvious she'd made an effort even in such a short time. "You look great, Rebecca. You didn't need to get dressed up for us," he told her. She squeezed his hand. "Thank you, David. I wanted to look nice." Once she was in the house, David called his children over. As they entered the room somewhat noisily, he asked them to tell Rebecca about their potential Facebook friend. Tyler, as the family's acknowledged expert, took the opportunity to show off, quickly logging into each of the family's 3 Facebook accounts and displaying the friend requests from the mysterious Tom Thomason. After praising Tyler's skill, Rebecca sat down in front of the screen and reviewed all the pending and archived messages, but couldn't find any additional information. Finally, she looked up at Tyler and Emma. The most likely explanation is some sort of marketing scheme. If you'd accepted the request, you'd probably get bombarded with ads for junk you don't need or offers to buy imaginary gold from Nigeria. There are bad people in the world, and you should never let strangers know anything about you. Okay? Both children nodded solemnly, and David thought the message he'd heard from Rebecca had probably made a stronger impression on them than when he delivered it himself. While they'd been working on the computer, it was getting dark outside, and David knew his kids would be hungry soon. "Rebecca, we're probably going to grab dinner soon. It won't be anything fancy, just a family restaurant, but we'd love for you to join us if you can." As David had anticipated, Emma and even Tyler immediately began insisting she come with them. She laughingly surrendered to the inevitable. The 4 of them piled into David's sedan and drove to a casual place near their home. As they drove, Rebecca began asking the children about what she'd seen on their Facebook pages, and soon Emma and Tyler were eagerly talking about their friends and activities. Listening to the conversation, David wondered, Rebecca probably already knows more about what's going on in Emma and Tyler's lives than Sarah ever did. He remembered that on the rare occasions they'd gone out together before her death, Sarah's conversations had mostly revolved around her work. He felt guilty for the disloyal thought, but knew it was true. The lively conversation continued during dinner and the drive home, and David was delighted when Rebecca came into the house with them. The children immediately settled in front of the television and asked Rebecca to watch with them, but she waved them off. "I need to talk to your dad for a while," she said, taking his hand and leading him into the living room. After they sat down, her face became serious. "I didn't want to alarm Tyler and Emma, but I don't think those Facebook requests were a marketing ploy. The Bureau has received alerts about some identity theft scams, but they usually don't target children. To me, it looks like someone is deliberately trying to get your family's information." The thought of his children being in danger sent a chill through David. Who could it be? What could they possibly want? "I don't know, David," she replied. "This is unlike any cyber fraud pattern I've seen before. What can we do? Close their Facebook accounts? Keep them off the internet altogether?" She looked thoughtful. "I don't think that's necessary, provided they're careful not to communicate with strangers and don't click on suspicious links in emails." She thought for a moment longer, then spoke. "The problem with the internet is that it's so anonymous. You can't tell who you're dealing with or where they are, but it's not as opaque as many people think. I have a contact in the federal system who might be able to help us. He probably won't be able to tell us who Tom Thomason is, but he might be able to tell us where he is. Let me make some calls on Monday and let you know what I find out." With those words, she got up to say good night to the two children. When she returned, David walked her to the door. But before she opened it, he embraced her. "You've been like a guardian angel to us," he said sincerely. "I don't know what we would have done without you." She looked into his eyes for a moment, then kissed him quickly on the lips. "I don't know if I want to be an angel," she said with a wink. "They don't have much fun." She then turned and walked quickly to her car, leaving David standing there bewildered. True to her word, Rebecca called David late Monday morning. "Do you know anyone in Palm Beach, Florida?" she asked. "Not a soul," David replied. "Well, whoever Tom Thomason is, he created his Facebook account using a zip code starting with 334, so he's somewhere in Palm Beach County," she said. "I can't imagine why someone in Palm Beach would try to contact us," David said. "But at least he's far away. That's reassuring." "I agree," Rebecca said. "Besides, we've been tracking a lot of scams originating in South Florida, so maybe this really is some new kind of internet fraud. Just make sure Tyler and Emma have nothing to do with these friend requests." "I will, Rebecca. And thank you. I feel much better about the whole thing. I'm so glad I could help." David. Despite what he'd said to Rebecca, David was not reassured at all. On the contrary, it seemed to him that he and his children were under constant attack. First had come the terrible news of Sarah's death, then poor Tyler's confession that his mother had been unfaithful, then word that Sarah might have been involved in some fraudulent business dealings before her death, and now some unknown person was trying to get information about his children. David felt like they were under siege, and he decided he would fight back. His first priority was to find the enemy in Palm Beach County and confront him. But how could he do that? A quick internet search showed that the county had a population of 1.3 million. Looking for Tom Thomason would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Besides, David thought the name was just as likely to be fake. David's methodical mind continued working the problem. Then an idea struck him. If I can't find Thomason, maybe I can get him to find me. A plan began forming in his mind. The chances are slim, he admitted, but it's all I've got. The first thing he needed to do was get Tyler and Emma out of the way. It was almost time for summer break, and that gave David an idea. He dialed his in-laws' number. "Dad, would you and Mom like Tyler and Emma to come visit for a week? I need to go out of town during that time, so you'd be a big help." When the children's grandfather happily agreed and all the arrangements for their stay were settled, David hung up the phone and immediately called the airline. "I'd like to book a flight to Palm Beach," he said. His children welcomed the news of their upcoming visit to their grandparents, but their enthusiasm waned when they learned their father wouldn't be traveling with them. It would be the first time they'd been separated since their mother's death, and the prospect brought back the fear of abandonment they'd felt since then. David hated to cause the children any distress, but he felt he had to do what he intended, and he succeeded in persuading them. A week before their visit, David began to be plagued by doubts. "Am I doing the right thing?" he asked himself. But despite the uncertainty, the thought of doing nothing was worse. His inner turmoil was briefly interrupted by a phone call from Rebecca, who called to ask how he and his family were doing. After a few minutes of conversation, the tone of her voice changed slightly, and David thought she sounded almost shy. "I was wondering if you'd like to get together next week. I haven't seen you and the kids in a while." Her voice trailed off uncertainly. "I'd love to do that, Rebecca, but I'm taking the kids to their grandparents. We'll be gone all week." "Oh," she said. "I understand. Maybe some other time." "I'd like that very much, Rebecca," he said fervently. David felt bad about lying to Rebecca about his plans, but he told himself it was at least partly true. Besides, he was sure he knew what she would say if he revealed his true intentions. When David returned home after taking the children to his relatives upstate, he immediately sat down at the family computer. One of the reasons he'd asked Sarah's family to take his children was that he knew they didn't have a computer, so he felt safe logging onto Emma's Facebook. Sure enough, a friendship request was waiting from Tom Thomason. David clicked the accept option and quickly received confirmation that Emma was now friends with the stranger. If nothing comes of this, David thought, I'll just unfriend him later. Next came the hardest part, pretending to be a 12-year-old girl. He studied his daughter's previous messages and decided he could imitate her style reasonably well. I may not be able to fool her friends, he admitted to himself, but I hope I can fool Tom Thomason. He decided his first communication should lay groundwork and wrote a short post about his visit to the country. Just a little news for her friends. Nothing to arouse suspicion, thought David. The next day, he planned to set his trap. OMG, going to Florida. My best friend Rebecca offered to take me and Dad said yes. Flying out tomorrow, can't wait. David decided to use Rebecca by her first name because it seemed to him that neither Emma's friends nor Tom Thomason knew her. He hoped Rebecca wouldn't mind. Now that the bait was in the water, David hoped he could make it enticing enough to get the fish's attention. Can't believe I'm in Palm Beach. This is to die for. David posted at 4 in the afternoon. The following piece went up the next morning. Spent the day at the beach. I'm going to be so tan. That evening, David posted what he hoped would be the hook. Going back to the beach tonight. Tomorrow Rebecca is taking me shopping on Worth Avenue. We're having lunch at Taboo's. So cool. As soon as the entry appeared on Emma's page, David headed to Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. Soon he was settled in his seat for the 2.5-hour flight to Palm Beach. Looking out the window, he remembered he'd been to Palm Beach once before. In fact, he and Sarah had driven through town on their way back from their honeymoon in Miami. They'd driven across the Lake Worth Bridge and then traveled down South Ocean Boulevard, admiring the mansions overlooking the Atlantic. After landing, David rented a car and drove to the motel in West Palm Beach where he'd booked a room. There was a fast food restaurant across the street, and he grabbed a sandwich and soda, which he ate in the room while studying a map of the area on his laptop. He hoped he was doing the right thing. After breakfast, he checked Emma's Facebook page but found only a few envious replies from her classmates. He didn't expect Thomason to contact him, but he hoped his fishing expedition might turn up something. Around 10 a.m., he got in his rental car and drove east over the Royal Park Bridge, turned south, then east again onto Worth Avenue. He wanted to be there early, and he needed to park on the street so he could leave quickly if necessary. After driving around the block where the restaurant was located several times, he was beginning to wonder if he'd miscalculated. But suddenly a car pulled out in front of him, and he was able to pull into the parking space. After feeding the meter, he walked down the street to the restaurant. Noticing a bench in the shade, he gratefully took a seat. He put on his baseball cap and sunglasses, hoping to disguise himself, then pulled out a copy of the Palm Beach Post and pretended to read while scanning the street. As he sat there, the realization of how flimsy his plan was slowly began to sink in. He had no idea if the mysterious Tom Thomason had seen the fake posts on Emma's Facebook page and would show up in response. Worse, David had no idea who he was looking for. Unless the mystery man turned out to be Marcus Reynolds, which David thought was unlikely, how would he be able to recognize the threat? All he could hope for was to spot someone suspicious and confront him. The street was crowded, and David kept trying to keep track of all the passers-by. The restaurant was filling up, and his stomach rumbled as he watched people going in. He cursed himself for not thinking to bring a sandwich, but he didn't dare leave his post. Time stretched slowly as he sat there. After a while, he saw the lunch crowd in the restaurant begin to thin. Glancing at his watch, he realized it was well past 1 o'clock. What an idiot, he thought. I wouldn't be any worse off if I'd stayed home. At least I could have seen Rebecca again. While he was watching the shoppers passing by, a woman strolling across the street caught his eye. Here I go again, David thought, seeing Sarah in a crowd of strangers. In fact, he noted the woman looked nothing like Sarah at all. Sarah had shoulder-length brown hair, and this woman was a blonde with a short cut. Her clothes were different from anything David had ever seen Sarah wear. But there was something eerily familiar about her, and as he continued to watch, David realized it was her walk that had triggered his reaction. He impulsively got up and followed her. Glancing down the street, he saw the blonde had reached the corner and was trying to hail a taxi. Taking his life in his hands, David ran across Worth Avenue just as a cab pulled up to the curb. He saw the woman climb into the back seat as the taxi pulled away and headed down the avenue toward the Atlantic. Before reaching South Ocean Boulevard, the cab turned left onto County Road and headed north. David followed at a distance. Finally, he saw the cab turn left onto a suburban street and continue until it reached an area near Lake Worth. David stopped his car at the curb about a football field away and watched as the woman paid the driver and entered an elegant house facing the lake. David squinted, trying to get a good look at her. With her hair color and short cut, she looked nothing like Sarah, but she was the same height and build. And as she walked down the path toward the house, David was again struck by her gait. Sitting in the car, David suddenly remembered a book he'd read long ago. In the story, an actor needed a disguise, but instead of a false mustache or wig, he simply put pebbles in his shoes. If someone sees me, the actor told his friend, they'll say it looks like that guy, but it can't be him because he walks differently. It works the other way too, thought David as he recalled the book. The certainty grew in him that he had just seen his deceased wife. Trying to control his growing anger, he walked down the street and up to the door. He rang the doorbell, crossed his arms, and waited. Opening the door, the woman looked at him with a puzzled expression. Then she did a double take and gasped. "David, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Sarah. Funny meeting you here," he said sarcastically. After a moment's hesitation, she spread her arms to embrace him, but he quickly raised his hands to stop her. "Don't touch me," he said coldly. Then, unable to contain his anger any longer, he shouted, "How could you do this to me? How could you leave Tyler and Emma?" Casting an anxious glance outside, Sarah grabbed his arm and pulled him into the house, slamming the door behind her. "I did it all for you, baby. For you and the kids," she insisted. "You have to believe me. It was the only way out." As she spoke, she kept glancing around nervously. "What the hell are you talking about?" David demanded hotly. "You're missing the point. None of this makes any sense." "Sit down, honey," she urged him. "You have to let me explain everything." She was speaking rapidly and rubbing her hands together nervously, sitting down and gesturing for him to do the same. When David sat down, an icy calm descended upon him. "Okay, Sarah, I'm listening. I was so close to it, baby. I had that big promotion within reach, but then the damn economy tanked. I knew if I could just boost our regional numbers a bit, the economy would recover and the promotion would be secure." She smiled pleadingly and held out her palms to her husband. "And David, once I got that position, we'd have been set for life. No worries about paying for the kids' college. No worries about retirement. No worries ever again." David could barely contain himself. Was it all about money and Sarah's position at the company? Sarah's hands fell to her lap again. "So Marcus Reynolds," David said grimly. "Yes," she continued, not catching his tone. "You've met him. Anyway, he and I figured out a way to move some sales from our biggest accounts. We knew they'd show up eventually, we just booked them earlier, in the current quarter. Every other region was reporting significant decreases in sales, and we had a significant increase. The corporation was thrilled. We earned the biggest bonuses the company had ever paid." She said this proudly, then the smile slid off her face like a cloth falling to the floor. "But the economy kept getting worse instead of better, and when Marcus told me it would all come out eventually, I knew we had to do something. We realized we'd need a lot of money to make this work. So Marcus created a dummy vendor account and started sending fake invoices to MedTech Solutions. They're so sloppy and wasteful there, they didn't even notice. So you were planning to fake your death in a yacht accident to cover your tracks? David asked. That's right, honey, she said, as if David were her star pupil. With enough money, it's not hard to arrange for someone to position a speedboat with a GPS beacon in Lake Michigan. We just homed in on the signal and transferred to it. So this whole thing was just a way to steal money and abandon your family? David asked bitterly. No, baby, she protested. That's not it at all. I knew I'd have to lay low for a while, but I made sure you and the kids would be okay. I took out maximum life insurance and put everything I could into my 401k so you guys would have plenty of money. She said this proudly. And you thought having enough money would make up for losing my wife and the children losing their mother? This time she heard his bitterness. No, baby, no. You don't understand. I was going to come back for you. As soon as things settled down, I was going to contact you. We could go somewhere safe, honey. We could be together. As she spoke, her eyes continued to dart around the room. David looked at her with a stony expression. You're forgetting just one thing, he said in an even voice. What's that, baby? She asked. You forgot about your affair with Marcus Reynolds, he said. She was startled at first, but then she stood up and held out her arms to him. No, baby, it wasn't like that. Marcus and I just worked together. We were never more than colleagues. Don't lie to me, Sarah, David snapped back. Tyler saw you two together in our bedroom. She gasped. God, did Tyler see us? Oh, that's terrible. A sob caught in her throat, but then she collected herself and straightened up again. It was just one time, baby, she said. He said he wouldn't help me unless I was with him. But it was just once, I swear. David stood up, ignoring her. He looked around and called out loudly, Come out, Marcus. I know you're here somewhere. Sarah continued to protest. No, baby, it's just me. It was just one time. But no sooner had she spoken than Marcus Reynolds appeared from the bedroom. He was wearing a robe and had his hands in his pockets. Leave it alone, Sarah. He knows, Reynolds muttered. I told you we were living too dangerously. Hearing Reynolds use his wife's name made David flinch. Sarah began to cry. He must have found us through Facebook. Reynolds grumbled. I warned you about checking on those two kids of yours. Then his tone changed to something cold and menacing. But that doesn't matter now. We need to get out of here. He turned to David and pulled an automatic pistol from his robe pocket, which he pointed in David's direction. As for you, bright boy, you're the only one who knows we're still alive. No, Marcus, no. Sarah screamed, but Reynolds ignored her. Looks like your kids are going to lose both their mommy and their daddy, he said with a cruel smile, raising his weapon toward David. I wouldn't do that if I were you, came a voice from the hallway. All three turned in amazement and saw Rebecca Torres appear before them, holding a Smith Wesson automatic trained on Reynolds' chest. Before Reynolds could react, a second voice came from behind him. Drop the gun, Reynolds. It's over. Special Agent James Sullivan emerged from the kitchen, his weapon also pointed at Reynolds. The former financial director looked at the two agents with hostility, but then his shoulders slumped. He dropped the gun to the carpet and slowly raised his hands. While Sullivan kept his weapon trained on Reynolds, Rebecca quickly moved behind the sullen man and twisted one of his arms behind his back, snapping handcuffs around his wrist. She then pulled his other arm down and snapped the second cuff. After securing Reynolds, she repeated the procedure with Sarah as the two fugitives lay on the floor. Sullivan made a cell phone call to the Palm Beach Police Department. A second call went to the local FBI office. A short time later, the house was crowded with uniformed and plainclothes police officers. David just stood back, looking stunned at what was happening. As the fugitives were led away, David watched them both carefully. Reynolds was muttering to himself. Sarah was crying. Neither looked in David's direction. When they were gone, Rebecca walked over to Sullivan, hugged him, and kissed him on the cheek. Thank you for coming with me, partner. I owe you big time. The senior agent smiled. You don't owe me anything. Solving this case will look very good in our personnel files. When Sullivan left, Rebecca finally looked at David. To his amazement, she walked over to him, put her arms around his neck, and sobbed. You big idiot. Don't you ever do that to me again. You could have gotten yourself killed. He held her tightly until her crying subsided, then pulled her back enough so he could look into her face. What are you doing here? He asked. How did you know where to find me? She smiled through her tears. Emma called me to chat. When she told me you weren't with them at their grandparents' house, I suspected you were going to do something stupid and started making inquiries. When I saw her Facebook posts, I called the airline and found out you'd booked a flight to Palm Beach. I talked James into coming with me, and we've been following you since this morning. She shook her head. We almost lost you when you took off after that taxi, but James guessed which way you turned and was right. David pulled her even tighter against him. I guess you really are my guardian angel, he said, and kissed her. David pulled the collar of his coat tighter around his neck. The humidity was high as always, and the wind off Puget Sound was cold and damp. Still, David thought it feels good to be here. The last 2 years had been difficult in many ways. If it had been a terrible shock for David to discover his wife was alive, the consequences had been even worse for Tyler and Emma. The fact that she went to trial and was convicted of numerous criminal charges only added to the family's pain. During the inevitable media circus surrounding the arrest and trial, David feared his children wouldn't make it through. The divorce had been a mere formality. Legally, Sarah could no longer be dead, but she would spend the next 12 years of her life in federal prison. MedTech Solutions, of course, demanded that David return not only Sarah's life insurance payout but also most of her 401k, since it had been funded by bonuses she hadn't legitimately earned. As the innocent party, David might have had grounds to keep some of the money, but he wanted nothing to do with any part of his ex-wife's ill-gotten gains. Instead, he began urgently looking for work as his family's savings were nearly depleted. The offer he received from a major aerospace company was welcome not only because it would provide for his family, but also because it meant moving across the country. There were too many reminders of Sarah in Chicago, and too many questions from friends and neighbors that he and his children couldn't comfortably answer. Finding a new place to live and work seemed like the best solution for all of them. David hadn't wanted to leave the state where he and his children were born, but he was ready to embrace the Pacific Northwest and start a new life. They'd been lucky enough to sell the house in Chicago and were able to buy a nice, if slightly smaller, house in Seattle. Sarah had always wanted to live in a showplace home, and David was happy with something more cozy. The kids seemed to like it too, and they were already making friends at their new school. He walked in from the deck and looked around for his car keys. Finding them, he poked his head into the kitchen to look for his wife. Come on, Angel. Let's go get our kids. Rebecca smiled happily at him. I'm ready when you are. As they drove to the school, David reflected on how much their lives had changed. Tyler, now 17, had struggled initially with the revelations about his mother, but counseling had helped, and he was doing well academically and socially. He'd even made the varsity soccer team at his new school. Emma, now 14, had been perhaps the most resilient of all of them. She'd formed a strong bond with Rebecca from the beginning, and having a stable female role model had made all the difference. She was thriving in her new environment. You know, David said to Rebecca as they pulled into the school parking lot, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for everything that happened. Rebecca looked at him with surprise. Really? Even the painful parts? Especially the painful parts, he said, taking her hand. They brought us together. They showed me what really matters. And they gave our family a chance to start over, stronger than before. Rebecca squeezed his hand. I love you, David Mitchell. I love you too, Rebecca Mitchell, he replied, still getting used to their shared name as Tyler and Emma came running toward the car, backpacks bouncing, faces bright with the news of their day, David felt a profound sense of gratitude. He'd lost a wife to betrayal and greed, but he'd gained something infinitely more valuable: a true partner, a real family, and most importantly, the knowledge that love built on honesty and trust could withstand anything. How was school today? Rebecca called out as the kids climbed into the back seat at AS Tyler, and Emma launched into animated descriptions of their day, Tyler's soccer practice, Emma's science project, the friends they were making. David smiled and pulled out of the parking lot. Home, he thought. We're finally home. The Seattle skyline stretched out before them, mountains rising in the distance, and for the first time in years, David felt truly at peace. The betrayals of the past had led them to this moment, this family, this life they'd built together from the ashes of heartbreak. Sometimes, he reflected, the worst things that happen to us clear the way for the best things yet to come. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.